when you scheduled last for a conference, you can look at it two ways, can't you? You can say, well, there'll be a bloody awful talk, no one will be there, so it won't really matter. Or you can say, well, it's the lure to keep everyone around. And I guess we're about halfway. We've got about half the crowd here and half that haven't. So I'll look at the positive aspect anyway. All right. The politics of diet. I wish I didn't have to give this talk because I wish diet wasn't full of politics. But regrettably, it is. And the sort of subjects I'm going to talk about over the next 3 hours are sorry, Rod. Okay, Rod just fainted. Someone resuscitate him. The Australian Dietary Guidelines, the Parliamentary Inquiry into Diabetes, the media, conflicts of interest, is there a conspiracy against low carb, and Diabetes Australia. So let's get straight into it and start with the Australian Dietary Guidelines. As you're probably aware, the most recent Australian Dietary Guidelines were published in 2013, and they are well overdue. The 2013 Dietary Guidelines were written by the Dietitians Association. They won the tender to produce the Dietary Guidelines, and they are incredibly unsatisfactory. And their rationale for not even examining the issue of low carb or saturated fat was that there was no new evidence. So they decided to ignore those two topics, and they don't not included at all in the dietary guidelines. And one can't imagine the amount of harm that's been done by those dietary guidelines. Anyway, they eventually decided to update those. And they created or asked for nominations and created an Australian Dietary Guidelines Expert Committee. And that expert committee reports to the CEO of the NHMRC, which is the sort of the funding body, overall body for health in this country. And they work with the governance committee. So to their credit this time, at least the NHMRC put in some structure that will remove or certainly expose conflicts of interest, whereas the previous time it was very much full of conflicts of interest that weren't declared. But they've been much stricter this time. The expert committee, as you see there, the 7 things that they're going to do. They commenced on the 1st of June 2021, and it's only going to take them 6 years to do it. So I think most of us could have done it in 6 minutes, but anyway, that's okay. So who's on this expert committee? The previous Minister for Health assured James Mukey that he would be on it, but somehow his name sort of slipped off the bottom of the list. I don't quite know how that happened. But as you can see, the first 4 members of the committee are dietitians. We have a token doctor on there whose expertise is breastfeeding. And then researcher, a couple of social scientists, a behavioural scientist. And the bottom 2 have recently been added. The committee has decided that older people are going to be a focus of the dietary guidelines. So they've added 2 new people to the committee and invited submissions for systematic reviews into diet for older people. So that's been the activity this year. So their progress has been pretty slow. And that was the initial plan, that scoping and prioritisation would be the first 3 years. Then evidence review, 2023-24, which hasn't really happened yet. And then the evidence to decision framework, and then lastly the guideline development. And this is the sort of summary of it all. As I said, they're pretty big on transparency, which is good. I think, to their credit, they've upheld that the whole way. What have they produced so far? Well, they've produced some priority topics. And I know this is a massive slide and there's too much on it and so on, but you can see on the left-hand side, you've got very high priority, then high priority, moderate priority, and low priority. The very high priority is dietary patterns relative at a population level. That sounds good. I like that. Animal versus plant sources, well, protein, that'll be interesting. And then high versus low, no intake of ultra-processed food. So, that's pretty good. The high priority is intake, exposure and health outcomes for meal patterns, frequency of eating, red versus white meat, no big deal. High versus low number intake of legumes and pulses. So I'm not quite as excited by the high priority ones. What about moderate priority? High versus low intake and health outcomes for beverages, including sugar, sweetened, etc. That's good. Dairy alternatives, added sugar. Oh, we're getting somewhere. And then low priority, intake and health outcomes for aspects of macronutrient source and quality, food source and type of fat in the diet. I would have thought they're all pretty important. Meal patterns, food processing, etc. So yeah, that's, I guess predictable. Some of the high priorities good, some of the low priorities should have been high priorities. These are the, I'm sorry about these slides and so on, but these are the topics for systematic reviews. Again, I'm not going to go through them all one by one. Some of them are good, some of them not so good. If you look at the top right, it says dietary patterns and health outcomes, which is good. Dietary patterns versus other dietary patterns. So hopefully they will look at low carb as well. So I expected to see, low carb prominent there, but they said dietary patterns must be relevant at a population level. For example, Mediterranean diet, food patterns high in fat sources with high omega-3, PUFA, MUFA, plant-based diets. So look, it's not surprising, but I'm not incredibly optimistic about the whole process. This is the last of those horrible slides, I'm sorry. But again, criteria for questions focused on contextual factors. So it includes adults, including older adults. They're big on the older athletes. They're big on pregnant and breastfeeding people. They're big on children and adolescents, which is all great. Aboriginals, Torres Strait Islanders, and so on. If you look at the right, the contextual factors, the influence of eating environments, barriers and enablers to consumption, and the particular factors for older Australia. They're really big on this older Australian thing. I would have thought they should have concentrated on children and younger Australians to prevent diabetes. But anyway, so that's what they've done up till now. They've focused on establishing these priority areas, and they're looking at all the systematic reviews in that area. They promise to communicate regularly about what's happening, but so every few months. And so the 9th meeting of the expert committee was held in July by video conference. The meeting discussed the selection of relevant systematic reviews that could be used to address the priority research questions and gaps in the current evidence base, which all sounds great. The evidence to inform the guidelines. They considered where existing systematic reviews could inform the priority research questions, and then evidence maps to identify systematic reviews for general, child, adolescent, and pregnant breastfeeding populations. So, again, I'm not sure actually what they're doing. But it's very slow. The next meeting was scheduled for August. They haven't reported on that yet. It's only September, so we can't expect too much. So that's really the update of dietary guidelines. I'm not terribly optimistic about a great outcome. There will be opportunities to comment. So I think we as a group really need to hit that pretty hard when it does happen. Whether or not they take any notice of it, who knows? But at least we try. And if you don't try, you're not going to get anywhere. So we'll try and keep the community, the low carb community, up to date with what's happening with it all. And when the time comes, encourage you all to submit your thoughts and your evidence and so on. So yeah, sort of somewhat depressing, but anyway, we'll see. Speaking of depressing, we had a parliamentary inquiry into diabetes. House of Representatives Standing Committee on Health, Aged Care and Sport, the state of diabetes in Australia, 2024. This report was published a couple of months ago. It was a couple of years in the making. As you remember, I reported on this at last year's Low Carb Down Under conference. They had invited written submissions, and there were 473 written submissions, including submissions from a number of people in this room, a number of people who are supportive of a low-carb approach to diabetes. Some pretty big names there, and having read many of the submissions, they were excellent submissions. They really were. They also invited certain people, as a result of their written submissions, to appear in person before they had hearings in every city. I mean, they went to a lot of trouble. I mean, there were the 10 people, as you might remember from last year, there were 10 people on the expert committee, including the 5 doctors in the House of Representatives and 5 others. They had hearings in every capital city, a number of times, and there were 200 presentations to hearings around the country. And I know certainly that myself, Jane and Ray Kelly, who's a big researcher in Indigenous diabetes, all presented in person at the meetings. There may have been some others. So they spent about 18 months gathering information. I mentioned to you last year that I'd gone around and met individually with 5 of the 10 members of the committee and had half-hour meetings with each of them. I travelled around the country to meet them. And I was very positive about the 5 meetings I'd had. I thought they all got it. I spoke mainly to the doctors. 4 of the people I spoke to were doctors. I thought they got it. They understood the issue, and they seemed to be positive about the role of low carb and the management of type 2 diabetes. So this report that came out was a massive report. I mean, hundreds of pages. But they made 23 recommendations, including such things as review of the dietary guidelines to include diabetes, target food labelling, added sugar. They promoted a levy on sugar-sweetened beverages, a sugar tax. They want to regulate marketing and advertising of unhealthy food for children, expand eligibility criteria for the GLP-1 receptor agonists, and expand access to bariatric surgery. So, look, okay, that doesn't seem too bad. Just as an example, here's the first 3 or 4 recommendations. Comprehensive economic analysis, yeah, that's fine. Expedited review of the dietary guidelines and ensure their revised guidelines include adequate information for Australians living with diabetes. Now, that's a good suggestion because, as you know, the previous dietary guidelines were for healthy Australians, which there's about 3. And not relevant to the vast majority of people who have some sort of chronic disease. Recommendation 3, food label, front of pack labelling for sugar, that's good, and so on. So I thought, that's okay. I kept looking for better recommendations, but I started off by reading the chairman's foreword. So the chair was Dr. Mike Freelander, who's a paediatrician in Campbelltown in New South Wales. He was one of the people I'd spent time with, and a delightful, charming man. I think a very caring doctor, and he seemed very invested in this whole inquiry. So he wrote in his foreword, he wrote about a 2-page foreword to this 400-page document. This is what he wrote in the foreword. There was significant evidence revealed about the importance of low-carbohydrate diets in all forms of diabetes, and this needs to be further promoted and evaluated. Fantastic. Great. This is the chairman writing in his foreword. So I thought, this looks good. Okay, so with great enthusiasm then, I tackled the rest of the report. So the next section I went to was prevention. So this is a big area, prevention of diabetes and obesity. You can see there in the index there's low carbohydrate diets. So I thought, that gets a mention. I did notice that it was clearly less than a page long, so that wasn't too exciting. And this is what they wrote about low carbohydrate diets. Through the course of the inquiry, the committee received evidence regarding the use of a low carbohydrate diet for diabetes management. In its submission, Sydney low carb specialists, Deepa and Alex, discussed the merits of carbohydrate restriction and argued that such a diet could have a more profound effect on type 2 diabetes and pharmacology interventions. Now, for some reason, that's the only mention of low carb. Then they quote Jane on type 1 diabetes and quotes her experience there, which is great. But, that's just 2 out of, numerous submissions that mentioned low carb. So why they chose those 2 to place in the report, I don't really understand. Let's just go to the next section, or one of the later sections, which is medications and other interventions for diabetes and obesity. I thought, great, righto, we'll get a mention here. No. So the total mention of diet of any sort in medications and other interventions for diabetes and obesity was that. Not a single word. Unbelievable. So, and having read the X 100 pages, there was nothing really more on it other than in the submissions that were there. So I must admit, when I saw that and I read it, I was pretty depressed, partly depressed, partly angry. I spent half my life being depressed and half being angry. And I don't know, I was too angry to do anything about it, to be honest, to start with. Plus I was at the Olympics, so I was having too much fun. But a couple of weeks ago, I thought, no, look, I can't let this go by. So I decided to write to Mike Freelander, and this is what I wrote. Hi, Mike. We're mates, buddies. You may remember I came to see you in your role as chair of the Parliamentary Inquiry, blah, blah, blah. It's been a while now since the publication of your report, and I was so depressed by it, I haven't had the energy to write to you since. The only mention of the effect of a low-carbohydrate diet was in your chair's foreword. There was significant evidence. I just mentioned that. Thank you for that. However, that significant evidence to which you alluded seemed to disappear in the rest of the report. Nowhere else was it covered, although there was a low-carbohydrate subheading in the section on prevention of diabetes and obesity, which I just said. Then in the next section, screening, diagnosis and management diabetes and obesity, not a word mentioned. Plenty about drugs and bariatric surgery, but nothing about the most effective, cheapest way of reversing type 2 diabetes. Incredibly disappointing to those of us who have had considerable success in managing patients this way. Could you explain to me the discrepancy between the comments in your chair's forward and the absence of anything in the rest of the report? I can only assume that the pharmaceutical and food industries have hijacked the parliamentary process and managed to keep this important information out of the report. I am incredibly disappointed at this missed opportunity to improve the health of Australians. So, I think I made my point fairly clear. To his credit, he wrote back a few days later. Dear Peter, no hi, but that's okay. Thank you for your email and I note your concerns. It's regrettable that you feel this way. However, given the complex, detailed and lengthy period of this inquiry, I believe our committee provided a thorough and well-organised final report. We received almost 500 submissions and travelled to a number of metropolitan and regional areas of the country to hear from individuals, organisations and government departments. It is difficult to provide equitable coverage to each of these submissions, including yours, as we had a broad and highly detailed topic to cover. However, I believe that our committee did our best to address the various recommendations and findings that we received. Recommendations 7, 11 and 14, which I'll show in a minute, while not explicitly outlining your evidence, in other words, nothing to do with it, encourages Australian government initiatives to promote diabetes management and understanding, which I suggest could include programs such as yours. I'm proud of our final report and the work of the committee members and the Secretariat, and I would like to stress that no hijacking occurred, nor was the committee or myself swayed by any group to exclude particular details. If you'd like to discuss this further, please let me know and we can arrange a time to meet. Yours sincerely. So let's have a look at these three recommendations, 7, 11 and 14, that he says, while not explicitly outlining your evidence, encourages initiatives which could include programs such as yours. So this is recommendation 7. The committee recommends the Australian government in consultation, develops a best practice framework to tackle the problem of obesogenic environments, including through better urban planning and the development of physical activity initiatives and supports, I can't see how that's really got much to do with us. Well, maybe we'll have more luck with recommendation 11. The committee recommends the Australian government implements a national public health campaign to increase awareness of the importance of prevention, identification of early signs and good management of all forms of diabetes mellitus. It sounds good, except that there was nothing in the prevention part of the report or the management part of the report about low carb. So, bloody useless. Okay, maybe recommendation 14 might do better. Develop education tools and resources to support all staff across the healthcare system to improve understanding of diabetes, its different forms, the early signs and management. The Diabetes in Schools program should be funded to allow all schools to access it. Well, admirable. But again, no indication that diet is a priority. So all our written submissions that many of you put in and spent many hours, I know I did, and I'm sure a lot of you did, all basically a complete waste of time. Incredibly disappointing. And again, contrary to what I felt when I was talking to these people one-on-one. But somehow between our conversations and the report, things got lost. And obviously these 10 people didn't write the report. There was a bunch of bureaucrats in the health department that did that. But you'd like to think that they would have at least had some influence. So incredibly disappointing. What can we do? I'll write back to, hi Mike, and my buddy, and I'll try and catch up with, I know a couple of the other members of the committee personally. One's our local member, Michelle Anandaraja, who's always been very supportive, but I'll try and catch up with them. But the report's out, the damage is done, and they're not going to change their mind now. They've spent God knows how many millions of dollars putting that report together, flying people all around the country, and it was amazing. But very disappointing. Okay, if you can't succeed with government, I guess the next best thing is to try and have an influence on the media. And to be fair, they're probably more powerful than the government, to be honest. And look, we have had a little bit of success in the last couple of years in the media. There are a couple of media organisations. One is the Australian newspaper, who have a health reporter by the name of Natasha Robinson, who's actually a lawyer, but who's very supportive of what we do, of low carb and the effect on diabetes. And she's published a number of articles so far over the last couple of years. So we have a little bit of support there. There's also a media chain, a newspaper chain called the Australian ACM, Australian Community Media, which have a number of, they have the Canberra Times and then a whole bunch of rural newspapers, the Border Mail and a lot of the large, cities around the place. So they have 100,000 online subscribers, so that's pretty good. And they have also been very supportive. They've written a number of articles. We had this series on the silent assassin a couple of years ago. I think Liz has had some articles there, and James has had a number of articles, including the article that I referred to in my talk the other day on red meat a couple of weeks ago. And I should say at this stage, we are incredibly lucky to have someone like James Mukey as part of our group. He's an incredible person, Australian of the Year in 2020, which gives him a great platform, gives him credibility. And I know he's frustrated that he doesn't have probably as much influence as he would like. But James, we really appreciate the advocacy work that you do, tireless advocacy work, and putting these articles in the newspaper and writing to medical schools and all that sort of stuff. So I really want to acknowledge that because I think that's remarkable. So, the Canberra Times and that group are very supportive, and in fact, their editor contacted Paul and myself last week about the Monash diet study that I spoke about on Thursday, and asked us to write an article. So, there are some people out there, but again, not in the big mainstream media. The mainstream media, on the other hand, love talking about this stuff, and this is the slide I showed you the other day about the Monash study last week, and that was on the front page of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, that the low-carb, high-fat diets may boost the risk of type 2 diabetes, study finds. And I won't go into that again because I spoke about that the other day and it's too depressing. So I just want to talk a little bit about conflicts of interest, because obviously that's, I think one of the big reasons why we don't make progress. And that, the people, there's a very powerful people, groups, company, businesses who very much like the status quo. They're doing very well, thank you, and they don't want things to change. You've seen this slide many times. This is the food industry and all the different companies that they own. This is the sort of the worldwide map, and this is the Australian map. It's not that different. And there are a small number of companies that are incredibly powerful that are producing processed and ultra-processed food. They're incredibly profitable. They're only interested in profit. They're not interested in health. And it's very difficult to counteract. You can imagine the millions of dollars of influence they have over politicians, the donations they make, the number of lobbyists. We have James as a part-time unpaid free lobbyist. They have, hundreds of paid lobbyists in Canberra and other governments, and it's very hard to compete. And much of the so-called research that is put out has conflicts of interest, and both the research and the guidelines. There was a very interesting article in the British Medical Journal just last week or the week before about conflicts of interest. The UK government's nutrition advisors are paid by the world's largest food companies, BMJ analysis reveals. And that diagram there, it doesn't do it justice. It's actually an interactive diagram that sort of you click on and it does, shows you all the interactions and so on. And it starts by saying that more than half of the experts on the UK government's advisory panel on nutrition have links to the food industry. And this is not just in the UK, but this is everywhere. If you dig deep enough, you can find conflicts of interest and the old story of follow the money. Which sort of makes you think, well, maybe there's a conspiracy against low carb. And this is the wonderful Nina Teicholz who puts out a regular blog, and this was her blog last week. She contacted me last week about the Monash diet study, and she speaks about that in this blog. And she asked the question, is there a conspiracy against low carb? And many of us challenging mainstream health advice find ourselves continually questioning whether the unending stream of inaccurate information from newspapers, academics, and experts is intentional or just ill-advised. And she goes on to that. So, it's been a bit depressing, I know, what I've been talking about. But I thought I'd finish with one little piece of good news, is that we've actually made progress with Diabetes Australia. And my initial dealings with wearing my Defeat Diabetes hat, I thought, I should talk to Diabetes Australia, shouldn't I? Diabetes, maybe they have something to do with each other. And I made contact 3 or 4 years ago with the then CEO of Diabetes Australia, by coincidence a former pharmacist, and I'm sure that's just a coincidence. And basically, it's fair to say the conversation did not go well, and we parted on somewhat testy terms. He seemed to get upset when I suggested that maybe their pharmaceutical sponsorship might have had something to do with their policies, but for some reason he didn't like me saying that. But anyway, no sense of humour really. Again, I did mention this briefly last year, but about 18 months ago, I got a phone call from, or I got an email, I think it was, from the new CEO of Diabetes Australia, a lady by the name of Justine Kane. And she said, she's coming to Melbourne next week. Could we catch up for breakfast? And I thought, well, okay, this is interesting. So I duly rolled up and we sat down for breakfast. She ordered eggs and bacon. I thought that's a good start. And her opening line was, what can we do to help you? Well, after she'd picked me up off the floor, I said, well, now we can talk business. And she was very positive. And, I think she was basically employed to really bring the diet to Diabetes Australia, at least into the 20th century, if not the 21st century. And, she really had a mandate, I think, for reform and for really moving the organisation forward, where they hadn't moved for probably 10 years under the previous the CEO. And one of the things that we talked about was, one of the interesting things she said was, the thing that we get asked most about is diet, and we don't have anything to give people. I said, well, we can fix that. And so we talked about the possibility of a partnership between Diabetes Australia and Defeat Diabetes. And we set off on that road. Well, it was a long, hard road. It probably took about 18 months. And it was very frustrating. But her problem, I think, is that they have so many stakeholders that they have to appease, and we spent a lot of time appeasing those stakeholders. I had to talk to the Australian Diabetes Society, which is their sort of medical arm, if you like, which is full of diabetes specialists, endocrinologists, and so on, and who seemed reasonably supportive on a phone call. I didn't really trust them, but they certainly, it was quite funny because, one of them said, "Oh, I put all my patients on a low-carb diet." I thought, "Oh, yeah, I'll bet you do." And he said, "Oh, but none of them stick to it." I thought, "Oh, maybe it's the way you sell the diet." But anyway, no, I didn't say anything. I thought, "No, that's good." Anyway, we eventually we ticked off all the boxes. We seemed to get all the different stakeholders on side. And finally, earlier this year, Justine and I, sat down and had a signing ceremony, and we now have a partnership between Diabetes Australia and Defeat Diabetes. We're still. I think it's a really important step forward. There's still a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of their guidelines, their literature, their recipes, their magazine is still. We've got to bring that up to speed. We're working on that. Again, it's a very slow process. There's still a lot of people associated with that organisation that are very invested in the traditional sort of management and so on. But I think it's a step forward. I wanted to finish on a good note. That was the only good note I could think of. So let's hope next year when I'm delivering my politics report, we've got slightly better news to tell. Thanks very much.